that begins to exist, the universe, having been created out of something, is incoherent. He says that it's simply overridden by the arguments for the finitude of the past. For if it is impossible that there be an infinite regress of past events, it is impossible that the first cause be a material object, since matter and energy is never quiescent. This was way too many words for a simple concept. I'm going to break it down. What he's really saying is that material causes exist within time and space. And since the beginning of the universe was the beginning of time and space, it's incoherent to claim that the universe had a material cause. You follow that? But if you think about it, we can say the exact same thing about efficient causes, can't we? Efficient causes exist within time and space, and since the beginning of the universe was the beginning of time and space, it is incoherent to claim that the universe had an efficient cause. What should follow from Craig's reasoning here is that the universe having any cause, efficient or material, is, quote, overridden by the arguments for the finitude of the past. I mean, after all, this should make sense, right? Everything we know about cause and effect from looking at the world around us tells us that when new things are caused to exist, it is by the interaction of efficient causes with material causes within time and space. In the observable, testable, knowable world around us, things do not and cannot be caused to begin existing without each of these elements. Now, this is the part where I always think that Craig would take the opportunity to try and minimize what our empirical experience can actually tell us about, general metaphysical truths, but he doesn't do that. In fact, Craig doubles down, and he insists that anyone who isn't willing to apply our empirical knowledge of causality within the physical universe to the whole of reality is, quote-unquote, blind to the evidence. The problem is that by doing this, he doesn't realize that he's falling on his own sword. Quote, as for the objection that it is unwise to extrapolate general metaphysical truths from everyday experience, it seems to me wholly unobjectionable to say that the causal principle is basically another way of saying the first premise of the argument, enjoys experiential support. Should we just ignore the uniform data of experience in support of premise one and behave as if it were just as likely as its opposite? Talk about being blind to the evidence, end quote. But I'll bet you that Craig would immediately object to the exact same logic if we simply plug in other empirically supported features of causality that don't happen to jive with his own personal theology. Watch me play a little game. I'm going to borrow Craig's own words to make an identical argument for the premise that whatever has an efficient cause must also have a material cause. I'm going to make up a word. Let's call that the double causal principle. As for the objection that it is unwise to extrapolate general metaphysical truths from everyday experience, it seems to me wholly unobjectionable to say that the double causal principle enjoys experiential support. Should we just ignore the uniform data of experience in support of the double causal principle and behave as if it were just as likely as its opposite? Talk about being blind to the evidence. The double standard here should be obvious. Now let's just come out and say it, guys. The real reason that Craig cherry picks from our empirical experience in order to posit an efficient cause without a material cause of the universe is because his presupposed theology instructs him to. Here it is, right from his mouth. Let me begin by affirming, quote is a quote, let me begin by affirming that Christian theology is committed to creatio ex nihilo. That is to say, the doctrine that God created the universe without any material cause. God is the efficient cause which produced the universe, and there was no material cause. He himself created the matter and energy. When we say that matter and energy were created out of nothing, we mean merely that, although created, they were not created out of anything, end quote. So Craig is not working from the bottom up. All of his reasons here are ad hoc. That is to say, he's not like following rationality wherever it leads him. The inferences he makes are designed specifically to funnel toward and conclude with his own personal theology. And if this means, ignoring his own epistemic advice, then so be it. But it shouldn't be a surprise to us because this is how the apologetic game is played. Christian first, philosopher second. Of course, this doesn't stop us from pointing out the flaws in these rationalizations. Anyway, so let's do that. Craig calls it incoherent to say that the universe itself had a material cause because the universe is here defined as the, I'm quoting him, is here defined as the whole of material reality. The whole of material reality cannot have had a prior material cause, because if it did, then it did not really begin to exist. You follow that? Now, before I say anything else about this, it should raise an eyebrow that when it becomes convenient for him, Dr. Craig not only acknowledges, but argues from the fact that the universe is qualitatively different from everything else that begins to exist, and that what is true of causation within the universe needn't apply to the universe as a whole. This alone should cast serious doubt on the Kalam cosmological argument. But he wants to have his metaphysical cake and eat it too. So, by the way, if you didn't know, metaphysical cake, very tasty. In any case, so there's actually two distinct objections contained within this statement. And they get sort of lumped together, so let me parse that out. The first is that for the physical universe to have been made out of something, that something would need to exist prior to the universe, and the second is that it would need to be physical. Okay, let's work backwards. First, the phrase material cause, just because it has the word material in it, does not necessarily mean physical cause. So Craig is equivocating here. He's playing a language game. The material cause of something is just the stuff out of which it was formed, physical or otherwise. There's nothing incoherent about God forming the physical universe from some non-physical substance, especially if you already have absolutely no problem with God willing the universe to pop into existence from nothing whatsoever. Okay, now let's talk about the other objection. Notice Craig's careful use of the word prior here. He says the universe could not have had a prior material cause because the beginning of the universe was the beginning of time itself. But here's the thing. Who says that the material cause of the universe had to exist prior to the universe? Why can't say, oh, the material cause of the universe exists timelessly and enter into time at the moment of creation? Sounds fucking crazy, right? Well, it is. But try telling that to Craig. Quote, I want to suggest that we think of God's eternity like the singularity as the boundary of time. God is causally prior, but not chronologically prior to the universe. His changeless, timeless, eternal state is the boundary of time at which he exists without the universe. And at the moment of creation, God enters into time in virtue of his real relation to the created order and his knowledge of tenth facts, so that God is timeless without creation and temporal subsequent to creation. End quote. So, I suspect that Dr. Craig is banking on nobody noticing that his argument for the plausibility of a timeless efficient cause would have applied just as well to the timeless material cause, and that his argument against a timeless material cause would apply just as well to a timeless efficient cause. But the problem is not merely that with Craig's own logic, if we apply it consistently, we get a material cause of the universe in addition to an efficient cause, or that we can have a material cause of the universe in addition. The problem is that it allows for a material cause of the universe instead of an efficient cause. It's like, what? Well, okay, I'm going to let Craig do the explaining. Quote, the causal premise of the Kalam cosmological argument, namely everything begins to exist as a cause, leaves it an open question whether that cause is efficient or material, and is therefore a much more modest premise than everything that begins to exist has a material cause, or everything that begins to exist has an efficient cause. The ambiguity here is quite deliberate, and I don't think that we can call it modest, because it's a very calculated strategic move. Why wouldn't Craig simply say that everything which begins to exist has an efficient cause of its existence? I mean, after all, when we say that such and such was caused to exist, efficient causes are what we're talking about, because material causes aren't really causes at all. The material cause of X doesn't tell us how X came into being, or why, or by whom. So imagine you're standing in an art museum with Dr. Craig, which would be a really fun field trip, and you're looking at a marble statue, and you say to him, Dr. Craig, what caused this statue to begin existing? And he says, marble. Well, that doesn't answer your question, because the stuff that a thing happens to be made from is not what we're referring to when we talk about the cause of its existence. You notice the switcheroo happening here? The reason that Craig needs his first premise to exhibit this kind of elasticity is because of quantum mechanics, because on a very, 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 very small scale, we do have real observable examples of things coming into existence uncaused. They aren't coming into existence out of thing, but they do begin to exist spontaneously without anything having caused them to do so. And if Kalam's first premise does not allow for that, then it has to be false. And Craig knows that. But look what we're left with now. I mean, this is a very, very different picture of this premise than the one we started out with when we first heard it. It's not intuitive anymore. It's not simple. It's not elegant. It's not straightforward. Now, I've explained why Craig's arguments against the universe having a material cause don't hold water, because they can be used against him. And now we have Craig allowing for things to begin existing without an efficient cause, so long as they have a material cause. Well, what does that even mean? I mean, what would it mean for the universe itself to have a material cause, because Craig allows for this, without an efficient cause? To have come into being from something, but not by something. What would that even look like? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. I mean, you'd have a kind of non-universe stuff existing eternally in a timeless, changeless, non-spatial state, which spontaneously erupts into the temporal spatial state. Stuff, really? How did it get there in the first place? I don't know, but it's God, really. How did he get there in the first place? We would have to assume that this stuff, like God, would just be there, timelessly, eternally. Now, Craig, we need to be fair about this. So Craig defines the universe as the whole of physical reality. So we have to assume that this timeless, changeless, eternal stuff, whence the universe came, is non-physical. Otherwise, we're not talking about the beginning of the universe anymore, but a change in states of the universe. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. I mean, at this point, what reasons do we actually have left for thinking that the whole of physical reality necessarily had a beginning? I mean, Craig's arguments for the finitude of the past don't work against the timeless, changeless state of the universe any more than they work against a timeless, changeless state of God. So according to Craig's own metaphysics, it is entirely plausible that the universe, the whole of material reality, didn't actually begin to exist at the Big Bang. It simply became temporal, maybe even physical, at the Big Bang. Now, I know the knee-jerk reaction to this would be to say that such a change has no potential to occur unless it was caused to occur, but the problem with that is that an atemporal universe becoming temporal is an event occurring, not a thing beginning to exist. And as such, it's not subject to Kalam's first premise. You may think, I'm playing a little game here, but I'm not the one playing the game. Well, my argument does not commit us to every event having a cause. What I deny is that things, substances, endowed with properties come into existence without a cause of any sort. Now, this is really shocking because Dr. Craig is a really big fan of the power of our intuitions. He always says that in addition to our experience, which I've already discussed, we know that Kalam's first premise is true because our metaphysical intuitions tell us so. So you don't expect somebody with this view to make such a counterintuitive claim. I mean, why should we think that things always require causes, but events, they can just happen spontaneously on their own for no reason at all? I can't say for sure, but I'll bet you it's got something to do with free will. Thoughts, deliberation, choices, these are all events. And it's no coincidence that Craig is a libertarian, which means he believes that we are irreducible free agents whose conscious decision-making processes are not constrained by prior causes. put much stock into the reliability of my primate brain's intuitions when it comes to the ultimate nature of reality, but I'll tell you this much, my intuition that events don't begin to occur uncaused is just as strong as my intuition that things don't begin to exist uncaused. So not only is Dr. Craig working backwards from his conclusion by cherry-picking from our experience, he does it by cherry-picking from our intuitions as well. But in any case, I want to be really clear that my project here is not to argue with Craig about this. Rather, I am granting all of his rules and applying them consistently. That's important because Craig doesn't do that. And then I'm just following them to their logical conclusion. Now, Craig himself may still object to the idea of a physical universe existing timelessly on the grounds that it would be incoherent since, remember he said earlier, matter and energy is never quiescent. By the way, quiescent means still, dormant, inactive. But this would be just another metaphysical double standard. Conscious minds are not quiescent either. And yet this never stopped him from positing just such a thing. So, you know how the problem with lying is that you tell too many of them, and then your story starts to get more and more complicated. Eventually, you can't really keep track of which lies are which and who you're telling them to, and because of that, people start coming to conclusions that you didn't really mean for them to come to, and then you have to backpedal, and eventually it all ends up biting you in the ass. Well, there's kind of a parallel to that in philosophy, especially bad philosophy. When you commit yourself to working backwards from a single conclusion, and your entire reasoning process becomes about protecting this precious conclusion from being falsified at all costs, you might start to lose track of what other kinds of conclusions your inferences commit you to, or commit you against. And then when you discover that your own rationalizations could be used against you, you have to do damage control by supplementing those rationalizations with certain principles or axioms that require rationalizations of their own, which can also be used against you. And at a certain point, you may not even realize that you have been arguing against yourself. What I hope to have shown you here is that ultimately, all of the apologetic gymnastics that allows apologists like Dr. Craig to end up with an efficient cause of the universe going without a material cause can likewise be employed by anyone to end up with an efficient cause and a material cause of the universe, a material cause without an efficient cause, even a universe that never began to exist. Now, I hope it's clear that I am not in any way giving an endorsement to any of these cosmological options I've been discussing here. I'm just fighting bad philosophy with good philosophy. My criticism of Craig is a kind of reductio ad absurdum, or reduction to absurdity. I'm using Craig's own reasoning against him. I am showing that were it not for an inflexible prior commitment to a theological doctrine, he would never in a million years be taken in by such reckless inferences. Is there any actual evidence for the universe having an efficient cause but not a material cause? Or vice versa, or both, or neither? The most honest answer is we don't know. And we can't know yet because we don't have enough to go on. We've known for a very long time that reality does not behave the way our brains evolved to think it behaves. But if you're going to play that game, if you're going to make up rules about how the world has to work, even in circumstances about which we have no data, and you're going to use those rules to insist that the universe we live in could not possibly exist unless certain religious beliefs are true, then you are going to be spending a lot of time running around putting out small fires that you didn't realize you started. And eventually, you're going to get burned. Thank you. It is my unique privilege to introduce the founder of Free Thought Blogs, writer of Dispatches from the Culture Wars. He's been on the Rachel Maddow show, for which I envy him to no degree. But my personal friend and one of the most unbiased, clear thinkers and writers in the atheist movement. Please give him a warm, godless round of applause for Mr. Ed Brayton.
Thanks very much. Great pleasure to be here. Pardon me, I have always a pleasure to be anywhere, Jason. A couple of years ago in Virginia, a woman filed a lawsuit against the local county board of commissioners because they were opening all their meetings with Christian prayers. Her attorneys filed a brief in the case asking that she be allowed to file anonymously as Jane Doe. And in many other cases, plaintiffs have been allowed to do so when it involves like a child or student in school than with an adult. The Board of Supervisors in her county is being represented by a group called Liberty Counsel, which is Jerry Falwell's legal wing with Liberty University. Despite the fact that her attorneys had many hateful, angry emails that could share to the judge, emails that were aimed at the attorneys because they were the only ones whose names were public at the time. The plaintiff's name had not been revealed. Liberty Counsel argued very strongly against conducting this case. And the judge ultimately said no, that the plaintiff had to reveal her name, and she faced a very difficult choice. Did she reveal her name and go public with it and risk the almost inevitable retaliation that comes from local communities in this case? Or does she withdraw the case? And in her case, she decided to go public with it. That happens probably every 3 or 4 times. Quite often, when the anonymity is denied, the plaintiffs will withdraw from the case rather than face the backlash from the broader community. And so in this talk and in an upcoming book that I'm writing on the same subject, I want to go into some of the history of this kind of abuse of plaintiffs in these church-state cases who challenge the right of Christians to have exclusive domain over our politics and our religion. And I'm going to show you why plaintiffs in these cases should be granted anonymity almost automatically. Of course, there are a few kinds of legal battles that provoke a stronger emotional reaction than lawsuits that challenge the many ways that Christianity is the dominant cultural assumption in America. Prayer in schools, creationism in schools, monuments on courthouse lawns, 10 Commandments monuments, nativity displays, that sort of thing. The plaintiffs in these cases are almost always met with a furious backlash from members of the community in which those battles take place. The plaintiff is almost always a very tiny minority, sometimes the only person in their community who's willing to stand up against this sort of thing, and that really puts them at enormous risk. And the remarkable thing in my research for the book is that when you look at the history of these lawsuits, the patterns are remarkably consistent, and it doesn't matter what part of the country you're in. You might think that it'd be worse, maybe in the Deep South. It's not. Some of these cases have taken place in, well, one that we're going to talk about took place in Rhode Island, which is founded by the man who coined the phrase separation of church and state. It doesn't matter when you're looking at, and I'm going to go in the book back all the way to the 1930s with cases like this, and all the way up to the present day. You get the same exact reaction. Those who challenge Christian privilege are ostracized, bullied, harassed, often also the victims of vandalism, almost always death threats, and sometimes very serious violence. Children are assaulted, sometimes their parents are too. Homes are burned down, families are chased out of town by the proverbial mob with pitchforks and torches. Before I get to some of the stories of those plaintiffs, I want to give a little history and some background on the legal battles that they fought. First, the question of the relationship between church and state was considered such an important one by the men who framed the Constitution that those who wrote the Bill of Rights began the very first amendment by addressing them. Of course, the first clauses of the First Amendment say, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free practice thereof. These are known as the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. Like most of the provisions of the Bill of Rights, these operate as restrictions on government action. The government may not establish a religion, nor may it prevent someone from practicing their religion within some fairly narrow exceptions. And then the text says explicitly that Congress shall make no law. Those restrictions now apply to state and local governments as well. They were incorporated, that's a legal term of art, by the 14th Amendment, which applies the Bill of Rights to state and local governments, as well as the federal government. The Supreme Court first applied the Establishment Clause to state and local action in 1947 in a case called Emerson versus Board of Education, which involved the use of public funds to transport kids to private Catholic schools in the state of New Jersey. State law allowed school districts to reimburse parents for the costs of getting to and from school.